Good morning, Delaware. Welcome to Off the Shelf. It's what is this, like 6 weeks now under lockdown, and our stay-at-home orders, and our doing this by Skype and all this other stuff that's going on in the community. I have to say, Ohio, I'm proud of you. You've been doing a great job of keeping the curve down and really working at this. And I know it's getting tiring, and I know it's getting fatiguing, but man, it's the only way we can all stay healthy. So keep up the good work. Nicole, now you're about to just change that all because you don't sound so hot today.
No, and Holly Quain mentioned at our board meeting on Tuesday that it is a bad time to have allergies because you're sniffing and sneezing and coughing and everybody looks at you twice. Well, with every season change, I always inevitably get something upper respiratory, and so I have bronchitis. Woo, woo.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. But it's you don't, at least you're not out in public wearing a sign that says Typhoid Mary or something.
Right? Yeah.
So, and our guest today is our good friend, Deputy Director and expert on all things weird in Ohio, Molly Meyers LaBadie. Hey, Molly.
Hey, I'm thrilled to be here. I'm happy to fill in some of the voice until we get Nicole back there.
Well, that's great. And you always have fun things to talk about, so we'll enjoy that. So,
Always.
Nicole, I'm going to let you start this off and just talk a little bit about the book that you're reading, and just, if you only want to do 2 sentences, we understand. Actually, I have to tell you, just from what I hear, we record these on Skype, you sound fine. You don't really sound bad at all, but I'm sure it's a problem to get the words out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it takes a little bit more effort, which then causes me to cough. So that's what it's gonna make me stop, is if I feel a coughing fit coming on, then the book review's done. So this week I picked up an advanced reader copy before we left the library, called You Are Not Alone, and it is the third book done by the writing pair now, Greer Hendricks and Sarah, and I never know if I say her last name right. It's either Pekanen or Pekanen. But Greer Hendricks and Sarah Pekanen, this is their third book. They also wrote The Wife Between Us and An Anonymous Girl. You Are Not Alone follows kind of the same theme as some of their other books. It is heavily female-driven, female-led. There's usually a lot of mental, psycho-manipulation, and usually there's one person who is incredibly manipulative and another person who doesn't realize that they're being manipulated. And so it's kind of how the one person falls into the other person's trap, and then if they realize that they've fallen into the trap, what they do to get out of it. So in this particular book, You Are Not Alone, it's the story of Shay Miller, who basically has I was in the wrong place at the wrong time kind of scenario happen to her. She's going down into the subway on a Sunday morning at 9 a.m., not many people on the subway at that time in New York City, and she witnesses a woman jump to her death in front of a subway train, and she becomes a little unhealthily obsessed with that woman's suicide because it's affected her so greatly. So she, is trying to get her head wrapped around it. And so she decides that she should maybe go to the memorial and just kind of pay tribute, even though she didn't really know this person. And that just sets her off in the wrong lane, because it turns out that this woman's suicide was for many other reasons very darkly woven into the rest of the story. Along the way, Shay Miller meets the Moore sisters, Jane and Cassandra. And Jane and Cassandra run a PR firm in New York City, but they also have a group of women in New York City who might consider themselves vigilantes to the injustice that can happen to women in the city in particular. So this is a very good book. It'll keep you on the edge of your seat. And I actually physically read a copy of the book in 3 days. It was great.
Wow, sounds good. You Are Not Alone, and who was the authors again?
Greer Hendricks and Sarah Pekanen, and even though I did pick up an advanced reader copy, it is available for people to buy, purchase, download, all those things right now.
Great. Thank you. And you sounded fine, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Molly, what have you been listening to or reading or binging on?
Well, the truth is I've actually struggled getting materials in. It seems that I really enjoy Skyping with my friends, and I'm talking to people all over the country. So I'm actually going to take us back to one of my favorite books, actually a graphic novel series I don't think I've ever talked about. And it's a little bit of my romance story with my husband. So if you don't know, I met my husband when he was working at a local comic shop. And I went in just to get tickets to something else, and there was this guy, so I kept going back and buying books that I could have been getting for free at the library. And if you know me, I am not about buying books. But on my bookshelf that I'm staring at here in my bedroom is one of the first ones he nailed it when it came to a suggestion for. It's a book series called Fables, and I'm going to talk about the first one especially, which is Legends in Exile, written by Bill Willingham. It's a wonderful series, though. And it starts with the idea there was this evil that came across the fairy tale land. And let me be clear, this is for adults or maybe older teens. I'm not, even though they're fairy tale creatures, this is not a book series for kids. So when this creature comes across the lands, it's called the Adversary, and it pretty much runs out all of the fairy tale characters that we know. They have to go into exile into New York. They pretty much, buy out a nice apartment complex in New York City where they're living until one day something happens and Rose Red, who is Snow White's twin sister, she goes missing.
Ooh.
And when she goes missing, one, she has a bit of a reputation. She may be married, but she's sort of likes to still date. And so we have to call Bigby, who's also known as the Big Bad Wolf, into the picture because he is the sheriff for all of these characters. He has redeemed himself, and he walks around very much like an old-time detective, like His Girl Friday type, quick moving conversation. He and Snow can't get along at all. So, of course, there's lots of flirting going on as they yell at each other and disagree over things. And the whole time, it looks like Rose Red not only is missing, but has been murdered. Ooh. And so Bigby and Snow, who've never really gotten along, have to start working together to try to solve this mystery. Well, the whole time that adversary is still out there. And we're meeting other characters like Jack, who is Jack from the Beanstalk, but also one of the orneriest characters. It's so good they make a spin-off series just on Jack and his fables. So, I can go on. This is just talking the first issue. This is a long-run series, has a huge fan base. First gift that my husband ever bought me once we did start dating, which this took months of me not knowing his name, past comic book guy. I refer to all my friends as comic book guy. They went to a restaurant across the street to try to figure out who he was one day when they were all leaving work. It was awful.
Do that because everybody thinks comic book guy. They think of the guy from The Simpsons. There's nothing like that guy.
Or the guy from Big Bang Theory, which he's maybe a little like.
Yes.
He's kind of like all of them. So, yeah, and if you meet Lloyd, he is lovely, and you can totally find out why he sold me this first series. I think that when I brought it home, I'd been asking for specific books, but I kind of told him about things I like, and a lot of people don't realize I focused in folk and fairy tale. I was going to be a storyteller in undergrad. Up until my senior year when my mom highly suggested, kindly as can be, that I look at library science. And
she wanted you to get a job, in other words.
She did.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so he completely won my heart over with this wonderful adult fairy book character storyline. And I have been just obsessed with it since. I've gotten one every Christmas. I get them all I think it's maybe close to being done as a series now. I'm a little behind on my reading of them. Maybe I can catch those up. But if I'd never talked about it, I felt like I was doing a disservice to Delaware by not sharing Fables by Bill Willingham.
That sounds great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So this book I've been reading this week is Stoney the Road, Reconstruction, White Supremacy, and the Rise of Jim Crow by Henry Louis Gates Jr. I think of Henry Louis Gates as sort of a national treasure, kind of the public intellectual. He's an academic who can communicate on a non-academic level. You might know him as the host of Finding Your Roots on PBS. He's a professor at Harvard and just all around interesting person. And when I was in school, there was this and that was 50, 60, 100 years ago, whenever, there was this gap in teaching African-American history because Black history was basically slavery, Civil War, a few minutes on Reconstruction, and then you jump directly to Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King. But if Reconstruction was discussed at all, it was sort of the Gone with the Wind Confederate States version of what happened. There's new scholarship from Dr. Gates and from others like Dr. Heather Cox Richardson, who wrote a book called How the South Won the Civil War, which is kind of changing this. And they talk about Johnson's period when he was, after Lincoln's assassination, he had a period of about 9 months before Congress was back in session. And he basically ran Reconstruction to serve white small business people and farm owners. He was a virulent racist, and the only thing he hated more than African Americans was the white aristocracy in the South. So he didn't do much to help. Then the radical, as they called later, the radical Republicans came in and said, "Wait a minute, this is not working. We want to support Black rights and everything." And there was this period of experimentation when there was a lot of self-governance among African Americans. And as a result, there was the rise of white terrorism in the form of the Black Codes and the Ku Klux Klan and things like that. Then there was the deal that ended federal Reconstruction period that went from about 1865 till about 1877, which of course brought our own Rutherford B. Hayes into the White House. Then you had the period when Jim Crow and the segregation and kind of the American apartheid went into effect that pretty much was codified by Plessy versus Ferguson in 1890. So there's that whole period. But then Gates goes on to talk about how beyond Reconstruction, Jim Crow imagery was used to subjugate African-American communities and how that imagery even continues today. But he also talks about the conflicts within the African-American community between the old Negro, as represented by people like Booker T. Washington, and the new Negro, as represented by people like Webb Du Bois, Ida B. Wells, and the Harlem Renaissance. So it's a fascinating book. The illustrations in the book alone are worth the price of the book because it traces so many of the historical images and archetypes that we know of Jim Crow and kind of those traditional racist images that formed a lot of the image of what we had thought of as African Americans. And it's just brilliantly told. So again, it's called Stoney the Road, Reconstruction, White Supremacy, and the Rise of Jim Crow by Henry Louis Gates Jr. So recommend it highly. We are going to take a break here. And then when we come back, we've got a whole variety of things we're going to talk about, including the progress on the new branch library, a little bit about the board meeting, and a little bit about what we're thinking about eventually when we get a chance to reopen. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Off the Shelf. We are here with Nicole and with Molly, and we are going to be talking to start with now about the new library. But before we do that, I just have a message from the Friends of the Library, who, of course, are the sponsors of this show. But I learned at our board meeting this week, the library board meeting this week, that the Derby Day that had been scheduled for May 2nd has unfortunately been canceled. But they had a number of sponsors who had contributed to this. Karen Cowan, the president of the Friends, went back to those people and said, we can either leave the money in and try to use it for another special event, or if you can just contribute it to furthering the aims of the Friends of the Library, which of course is to support the library. And so far, she said she had just put the message out, and already 4 of the sponsors had come back and said, use the money for the Friends purposes. So I just want to say thank you to those sponsors. We will have a list of those people when it's complete that we will talk about, and we'll thank them in person on the radio show here. But also just to say thank you to the Friends for continuing to support the library, even through this strange period that we're going through now. So one of the things that we are working on, despite the fact that the physical buildings are closed, is our new Powell/Liberty Township branch library. I know we've been involved with that project. Here's where we stand right now. There was an article this week in this week about this, but just wanted to kind of fill in a little of the details. We are working with the architecture firm SHP, which is based in Cincinnati, but has their office in Columbus, and we've been working a lot with them. And we're also working with Marker, which used to be Thomas & Marker, is the construction firm that we'll be working with. We have been like the week before we shut down, we had a meeting with the staff and the architect and Holly Quain, who was mentioned earlier, who's a trustee, who is kind of representing the board in our design meetings. And we got a first look at a design for the building, which we have been tweaking like crazy. And then this week on Wednesday and Thursday, we had a number of small group meetings talking about specific things within the work areas. So I think both of you have sat in on some of these meetings, which I haven't, because I wanted the staff to be able to talk without feeling like the director was looking over their shoulder. Nicole, I think you sat in on one on meeting spaces.
Yes. So I sat in on one today with Jenny, and she is an interior designer with SHP. And she led us to talk about meeting rooms and open public programming spaces, as well as the Maker Annex that we are looking at for that branch. One of the really fun things that we discussed was this branch is going to be 3 levels as what we're looking at right now, with kind of a basement area, a main level, and a second level. And we're looking at the same enclosed meeting room spaces, number-wise, that we have at our Orange Branch Library. We have about 7 at our Orange Branch, and that's about what we're looking at. In my meeting, we discussed. But then, my goodness, there are just so many open areas that are just going to be beautiful for people to sit at a desk and work with their lap. Go cozy up in a nice comfy chair and, have their phone or their book or their magazine in front of them. And these meeting room spaces, they'll be good. They'll have the technology that you'll need. They'll have, the brainstorming equipment if you want to do some whiteboard brainstorming on the wall. And they'll have the privacy so that you can lift your voices a little bit louder than what's to be expected at a library. But of course, there's going to be so many opportunities for people to just kind of mill about. Loitering is always welcome in a library.
Well, it is now, and it will be in the future. When we finally actually can open the library again, it may not be quite the same thing, but we're looking we're playing the long game here. So
right. One of the things that I was most looking forward to that I have been begging for from the beginning of this entire project is a large meeting room area. We have, right now we have 100 people on staff at the library, and we can't hardly put us all together in the same branch when we do our staff development day. And so I've said at the minimum, say we're going to hire another, 30 to 50 people for this new branch, we need a room that can fit 150 people. So that's been my pillar that I'm willing to die on from the very beginning. And this proposal has it. It's going to be beautiful. There'll be 2 rooms that can be sectioned off for, 30 people at tables. But if you open up that wall that's going to be in between, you join those rooms together and you put the people in just kind of a lecture style seating, it could be anywhere from 150 plus. And I am just over the moon about this. So looking forward to it.
Molly, I think you've sat in on a couple meetings too, haven't you?
I was in one, and it was a very important one, actually. I sat in on one about accessibility with the new building.
Yes.
In Delaware, we have patrons of all sure that our buildings really meet all of those. So we were lucky to have a special guest star, is how I'm going to refer to it, in our meeting. We had the Delaware County Board of Developmental Disabilities because we wanted to make sure we weren't leaving any, especially obvious things out. We're looking at having bathrooms that can meet the needs of all of our patrons. So no matter where you are in the patrons are with their abilities, this will be something that'll be there. And, all of us can find ourselves in a need for something more accessible. You can break your leg and suddenly the stairs become something harder than you ever expected. We are looking at a building with multiple, open floors, which we haven't really had. We have a workspace upstairs at Delaware, but this is sort of a new concept. So being able to bring in a partner like we were for this conversation, we were actually one of the first conversations as well, because we wanted that conversation to carry over into everything else that we talked about. The distance that our bookshelves are going to be from each other, having large print, where can we fit large print? What kind of signage will we, eventually start needing? And what are the design layouts that we're going to need to make those happen? Things that we can catch early on so that we're not trying to refit for needs, but we're keeping that open, making sure the furniture is going to fit. So if all the chairs are pushed out, somebody can still maneuver around them. It was really exciting to see, we are really excited about a beautiful new building, and we're really excited that everybody's going to be able to use this. And, it was great seeing how close we already were with things, from elevators to, like I said, the bathrooms are really impressive, what we're looking at, including one with an adult changing table.
Which is something I had never even knew existed until we started working on this building.
No, and I'm so excited to be able to offer that in our community.
Yeah, you don't even think about that. At least I hadn't until we started talking. And you realize every time you look around, like when the folks from Creative Foundations or Alpha Group come to visit, and you have people who are profoundly disabled who need that kind of assistance, you don't want to have them go all the way home just because they need to use a restroom. So I think it's really interesting that we're considering those things as we work on the new building. So,
and our architects are just being amazing. They already were trying to do more than the minimum. And so it was exciting to see how much further we were from the minimum, that we're not just going to do just the legally required. We're going to do what it means to make people feel a part of what we're doing.
Great. And I think that's it's part of our commitment to the community, to the whole community. And I think it also reflects well that on the architects that they're willing to do this. So that's great news. So I think it's interesting. We are, close to having some things that we can actually share with the community and talk about with the community. And we will continue to consult the community because it's their library after all.
Yes.
We just work in it. So, but we in brief, we were kind of kidding about loitering in the library, but I wanted to say we are, like everybody else, hanging on the governor's words. We heard yesterday during the governor's briefing that on Monday we'll be hearing about some of the reopening ideas for businesses in the community. And we have to take our cues from that sort of information as well. And so we're going to be really waiting to hear what he has to say about reopening. Nobody wants to resume library services more than the folks who work in the library. We are just chomping at the bit to be back in there working with the public. Now, there are certain people who communicate with me on Facebook who tell me that they want us back even more than we want to be back. And April Nelson, this one's for you. But seriously, we're waiting to hear, and we are talking. We have been talking since we closed, but we are talking more and more seriously. And as we get closer to what we're going to have to do to resume providing services. So we have an all-staff meeting later today, Friday, with the entire team to talk about things that the management team has been talking about, and to get more of ideas from them about things that we need to do in order to reopen. We're thinking about everything from masks and gloves and how we're going to disinfect counter space to the announcement that was made this week. I think I might have talked about it last week on the show, that the Institute for Museum and Library Services and OCLC and Battelle are doing on research about how we can disinfect library materials. Lots of research has been done on plastic and hard surfaces and things like that. Not much has been done on paper or cardboard, which is, of course, the thing that we handle the most. So we need to know how to quarantine, and if not to quarantine, how to disinfect materials like that. So
and George, I believe Nicole or Hannah in communications did share on our Facebook feed earlier today more information about that study going on.
Yes, they did. And if you want to read that news release, it's really interesting. We are very fortunate. We've got Battelle in the community. OCLC, which is one of the largest library organizations in the world, is based in Dublin. And the Institute of Museum and Library Services is the one federal agency that supports both museums and libraries. They don't do grants directly to libraries like ours, but they do to the state library, which then can do pilot projects and things like that. So they had some money left over that was going to be able to be used for research. And so it was a nice confluence of things going on. So yes, if you're interested in reading more about it, do check out our Facebook page and check out the article that's available there. So we are really eager to get started again, but we have to make sure that what we're doing is safe for both the public and for the library staff. We don't want to become a hotspot. That's not. No. We want to be a hotspot for reasons that don't involve viruses. Right. So we're going to be doing our best to make sure that when we do open, and it'll be a phased opening. We're not just going to throw the doors open again on some day. It's going to take us some time to make sure that we're doing everything we can to keep everybody safe. So we appreciate your patience. We appreciate the patience that the staff has shown. And I got to say, the board was overwhelmingly supportive of what the library staff has been doing when we met on Tuesday. We had a Zoom meeting on Tuesday with the board that they were very, very supportive of what the library is doing. So what the library staff is doing. So I got to thank the staff because they've just been marvelous too. So we will have more about that soon. We probably talk more about that in a future show about what steps we're taking to make the library safe. But for now, we're just about out of time. So I wanted to thank Molly Meyers LaBadie for being our guest today.
Always happy to.
That's a pleasure. Gage, it's always great having you behind the board and participating in the conversation.
Absolutely.
And Nicole, I hope you're feeling better really soon.
Will work.
So for now, we will see you online, and thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.